Sometimes it is a matter of difficulty. Sometimes it is a conundrum. Sometimes it's a matter of paradox and polarity and irony and even absurdity. Sometimes it's a great enigma, an overwhelming puzzle, an experience of unrelenting tension. Sometimes it requires great nuance. Sometimes life is anything but clear. Sometimes biblical faith and biblical understanding are anything but clear. You've all heard Paul say, or if you haven't, you should, for I should have heard it, for I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do what is good, evil lies close at hand. Man, that's complex. Intellectually and experientially, I don't really know what to do. There's some kind of power at work within me preventing me from doing the good that I know that I want to do. Wow. Life and biblical understanding sometimes are so doggone hard. Yet, on the other hand, life and the Bible are sometimes so easy, so simple. Our psalm for today is biblical faith at its simplest. According to this song and others like it, life is a matter of two very clear paths: the path of good and the path of evil. Those who follow the path of good, so says this psalm, well, they are honored. Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked or take the path that sinners tread. Their delight is in the law of the Lord. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season. In all they do, they prosper. The path of good leads to good. And conversely, the psalmist says, the wicked are like chaff that the wind drives away. They won't stand in the judgment. That is the day when what they have done will catch up to them. Crisis will come their way. It's all very simple. There is absolutely no nuance here. It's all very clear. The righteous will have a good life. The unrighteous, well, not so much. So the advice is do good. Delight in the law of the Lord. Meditate upon it day and night. It's going to benefit you. Now, frankly, this is the kind of advice you give to kids, and the kind of advice you should give to kids. They need to know that life is orderly, that good produces good and bad can produce bad. It's likely, by the way, that this particular psalm was an instructional song for children. Some scholars call it a tract for socialization, a means to help children grow up in the way that you want them to grow up. Now, while I think there is a shallowness to this perspective, you know, the good don't always get the goods, and those who do evil don't always get their just rewards, I do think there is a role for this kind of simplicity. What a psalm like this communicates is that life, creation, the world are not orderless realities. Hidden though it may be, there is an order, this kind of song is suggesting. You and I often don't do our best work when instability is thought to be the truth that runs the universe. And lately, with mass shootings, the wars in Palestine and Ukraine, and huge storms, one crisis after another, it's hard to think that life has some degree of order. Everything now seems unstable. This little thing I do on Tuesday night called Compline has been an amazing experience for me. We started it during COVID when we all weren't meeting together, and I think we were doing it 5 or 6 nights a week. Now I lead it, or Paula leads it, just on Tuesdays. And I have been floored by the reaction to this practice. Many people have told me how helpful this has been to them. And truthfully, I have found that hard to believe. It seems so simple, somewhat boring to me, and clearly repetitive. And I've wondered for a long time, and I've wondered with others, what is the appeal to this? Well, this past week, I think I've figured it out because of a conversation I had with one of you. I surmise that you and I want to know that in the midst of the craziness, there is some kind of order. Someone, something we can rely on. We want to know that in some way we matter and that we are secure. To be prayed for, to pray, even if it is in somewhat of a predictable and formulaic manner, is to be discovered by something stable, something that provides order to life. And life lately has felt, I don't know for you, but it has for me, life has felt so random, so harsh. We all want to know that there's something bigger than the disorder, something larger than the harshness. Now, you're all aware of the challenge that comes when we try to make too much of the order. When we try to capture life in our formulas, our sayings, or my favorite, our cliches, or our laws. Life is much too complicated for such capturing. And what's more, rigidity often flows from people who want or demand too much order. The beauty of law becomes the ugliness of legalism. You better do this, you better do that, and if you don't, you're going to pay the price. And life becomes a means, or law, becomes a means for judgmentalism. The rigid law enforcers often become violent, by the way. Look at the Taliban in Afghanistan and the morality police in Iran. Violence often flows from people who get too rigid. Some of the ugliest people in the world, and I am humble to say this, are the religiously rigid who want everybody to fit in their nice little neat order. But the theology that comes from the kind of psalm that we confront today, that speaks of the law of the Lord as a matter of delight, was really not meant to squeeze the life out of life. It was meant to suggest that there is an order to life, that we do better when we live within it, that chaos and unpredictability are not good places from which to start. Most therapists will tell you that predictability, order, and tradition are really the only way to create a healthy ego structure in the early years. In other words, we flourish better when we start well. And generally, order is a good place to start. It's that simple. Now, the Pharisees who show up in our gospel reading for today, without a doubt, started in order. They were the experts in order. They were the experts in the law. And in many ways, their concern for the law was very, very good. It probably made them responsible people, folks you like to have as neighbors because they don't make too much noise, they mow their lawn when they're supposed to, they rake their leaves when they're supposed to. I'll bet that's what the Pharisees were like. You'd like having them as neighbors. I'd like having them as neighbors. But the law, while a good place to start, isn't necessarily a good place to stay, nor the place to end. And this, by the way, is where it gets a little more complicated. My mom was a woman who grew up in a very orderly German household, a very orderly universe. It helped her a lot. It enabled her to do well. It enabled her to get a lot accomplished and not to misbehave much. I always wanted to look back and figure out when my mom might have misbehaved, and truthfully, I tried my best, and I have not discovered when she misbehaved. Sometimes, though, my mom had a hard time not setting up camp in that little orderly universe that she had started in. She would become very judgmental toward those nephews and nieces who would live together instead of being married. She'd always say, I'm not going to go to their weddings. They're already living together. She would be harsh toward those who spent money in ways that she wouldn't spend it. And she would be harsh to those who misbehaved. She started in the law and then stayed there too long. I suspect that the New Testament wants to portray the Pharisees as those who started in the law and maybe stayed there too long. In today's gospel reading, they came up to Jesus in what is the final controversy dialogue in Matthew to ask him which commandment in the law is the greatest. Now, you got to understand this. There were 613 laws. So the Pharisees are asking, okay, Jesus, tell us which of those 613 is the most important to you. And you know how this works. If he says number 45, well, they think number 47 is more important. And if you say 13, well, they're really looking into 613. Well, Jesus doesn't go down their path. Jesus doesn't seem to be opposed to the law, and the Gospel of Matthew makes that quite clear. But he also doesn't seem to be preoccupied with the complexity of the law. He doesn't abide in it so much that he has become obsessed with all its particulars. He says that what the law fundamentally is really about is quite simple. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You may want to go down 613 paths, but Jesus says there's only one path, and that path is love. Sometimes it's really that simple, folks. Sometimes you and I make it all too complex. The law is summed up in one invitation: love. Life really looks complex sometimes. Life appears downright messy too often. But the call to us really is simple: love. You don't have to figure out 613 situations. You simply need to love. And in many ways, this is what Martin Luther figured out in the 16th century. He was convinced that the church was making it all too complicated, was making it about buying your way, performing your way, achieving your way, living and ending up in the law. Yet in biblical books like Romans and Galatians, Luther confronted the simple message of God's love for us that always, always, always is the first word spoken to us. And that simply invites us to respond with lives of love. Now, if you study Luther's life, you discover that he was a man who was torn in, 613 directions. He was a tortured individual, and the simple message of grace and love and the simple invitation to live out love changed it all for him, and the church was never, ever the same again. Now, I don't want to be cliche-ish. I hate cliches. It's not my style to be cliche-ish. I don't want to sound naive or starry-eyed. But maybe, just maybe, all we really need is love. Maybe in the complex world that we're living in, what is needed more than anything is love. The love that is God's gift to all of us, and the love that is our calling. Israel, all you need is love. Hamas, all you need is love. Russia, all you need is love. Republicans and Democrats, all you need is love. Friends, family members, church folks, all you need is love. I know you're going to say to me it's more complicated than that, but not for today. Just for today, it's simple. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and love all humankind as you would love yourself, and love. Amen.